Welcome to the Power of Owning Your Career podcast, the show for women who are seeking more fulfillment in life and simply not getting it from their current situation. We focus specifically on careers, but hey, we spend a lot of time in our careers, so making changes here will definitely create an impact in your overall happiness. I'm your host, Simone Morris, and my mission is to empower women to succeed. I believe that in order to powerfully own your career, you must decide and claim that you want to sit in the driver's seat. You must know that you deserve better and be willing to not only do the requisite work, but be willing to go out on a limb to ensure your success. Each episode focuses on profiling a leader who is clearly demonstrating ownership of their career. Join me and my guests as we explore career journeys and bring you actionable strategies to use to get into the driver's seat for your career. Because ultimately, your career is your responsibility. Let's get into the show. Hey, everybody. It's Simone Morris, host of the Power of Owning Your Career podcast. It is season 5. I cannot believe we're in 5 seasons already, but I'm excited and geared up and just ready for a wonderful, wonderful season. We're going to kick off with this week's episode, and then after that, we are going to do some celebration for Hispanic Heritage Month. Yes, that's right. Hispanic Heritage Month is in the month of September, crossing over to October. So we will be featuring some leaders of Hispanic heritage. So excited to share their stories about how they got to the driver's seat. Very exciting indeed. The other exciting thing that's happening this season is I will be creating an Instagram page for the Power of Owning Your Career podcast. Please be sure to look for us on the Instagram platform and be sure to comment on the episodes and just share your thoughts and feedback on the season. Want to let you know that the LinkedIn platform still has a group dedicated to the podcast for the after podcast conversation. Be sure to go there and check us out. And as always, if you have any questions on the podcast or comments or thoughts, give me an email or drop me an email at smorris@simonemorris.com. Without further ado, let's jump into the kickoff episode for season 5. Thank you for being a loyal listener. If you haven't already done it, please go and give us a review wherever you listen to podcasts. Thanks so much. Today, I'm so pleased to have with us Alana Hill. She is an international change leadership expert who inspires professionals to make changes in their lives and in their organizations. With over 20 years of cross-functional leadership and training expertise, Alana helps individuals and organizations to accomplish their goals by utilizing sharp analysis, strategic planning, and interpersonal skills development. I'm excited to have her on the podcast. She's a fellow project management professional expert, and we're both in the speaking world and just, both on the same page about taking ownership of your career. So I am super pleased to have her as a guest on this week's episode of the Power of Owning Your Career podcast. I'm so pleased today to have with us on this episode, Alana Hill. Alana, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
Awesome. Well, let us jump right in. I usually ask my guests, how did you know when you were in the driver's seat for your career?
Well, I knew when, really when I chose my major, when I decided to against all odds, become a petroleum engineer in the South as an African-American woman. So it's kind of that being a little disruptive, I think, throughout my career, or following my own desires, my own passions. But I would certainly say from a career standpoint, probably after about 4 or 5 years, I was with a multinational Fortune 500, and I just really began to push the issue about the direction that I wanted my career to go in, really after some soul searching and realizing that it was really training and talent development that were my passions. And so it was being a bit insistent that that's what was offered to me or what was presented to me. It was an organization that didn't do internal postings, so you didn't know what was available. So, I would do some internal networking, and from that found out what I was most fascinated by.
That's awesome. Well, let's rewind just a little bit, because most people, when they select their majors, me included, let me say my major was retail management, and I'm not doing the buyer work I thought I would be doing right now. So you've caught my interest by saying I pretty much knew I was in the driver's seat when I chose my major. So take us back to what led up to that to ensure that you knew you were going on that engineering path.
It's funny. I really, around middle school, when I began to really have an affinity for math and science and wanted to figure out what to do with that. There were certainly within the STEM world, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. I'd looked into medical, some different opportunities in medical. Quite frankly, realized I'd be in school forever. Sadly, that was one of the reasons. But even when you think of driver's seat, I knew I knew that was not necessarily going to work for me. Although in this pandemic, I will honestly mention, I wish that I had be one of those experts. But it was, just realizing how much I like math and science and how proud I kind of was of being a geek and wanting to continue to follow that geek route, but also as a geek who enjoys people, not quite language I knew at the time, but looking into technical leadership even early on. So I figured I would be an engineer, and then I would be the boss of engineers, and then I would I would figure out, feed back into, then developing engineers as I began to learn more about that. I always had a teacher's heart, so that all just kind of folded in together.
I love that. Oh my goodness. Now I'm thinking about my daughter who's 5, and what she will be like in middle school, knowing her past. She probably, you know what? She probably already knows. That's how strong her personality is. It'll be earlier than that. But that's amazing. So talk to us about what your formula is for owning your career. What have you found to be helpful on this journey?
The most important thing, and I talk to my clients about this all the time, is self-awareness. When you know yourself, when you know what your passions are, what your purpose is, it's really sad to me to see people kind of discovering these things, later in life, and then realizing how much of their life they lived without that internal, without following that internal direction. So the more we know ourselves, know our gifts, our talents, those things that make us, uniquely us, our unique capabilities, and then follow those and let those be our guide.
Yeah. So was there ever a time that you were out of the driver's seat and had to, was there a time you were passenger in your career?
Oh yes, absolutely. I mean, anyone in an organization is subject to the decisions and preferences of that organization, whether that's geographical positioning, whether that's assignments that you take to get you to the next assignment. I mean, because even looking at my own career journey, because I'm outdoorsy and I'm athletic, when I began to learn about oil and gas industry, I knew that my first job would be outside, at the well site. And I didn't necessarily flinch about that. It was actually quite exciting. But what's not exciting? Getting called at 2 o'clock in the morning saying, hey, you need to get up here because we need to go do this job. That was not exciting. And that got really old really fast. So it was so those were situations where I was subject and kind of confined by what that role required, but still really holding on to the notion of the fact that I was there to learn a certain set of skills that I could then use and apply. And so, I mean, it was an incredible challenge, being in the field, not just because of, the South Texas heat and conditions, but also there was, quite a bit of, what I often refer to as hazing, being, younger, but also quite frankly, some discrimination. I was in the oil field in the 90s, not the friendliest environment. And so really having to endure that, to be able to, to get to the next steps and to be able to impact that culture from within.
Well, talk to us, because you brought it up, discrimination. Talk to us a little bit about what you have found helpful for you to navigate your career with that experience.
The first thing is to find a good mentor. And I would love to say I found mine. I think she found me. We found each other. I mean, when I say mine, I often speak of this one kind of super mentor, super guide in my career. Her name's Paula, and anyone that's ever heard me speak has heard me, talk about Paula. I tell people you should get yourself a Paula. And she really single-handedly, and she knows this, single-handedly emotionally and professionally guided me through a lot of that. She had gone through the field, through the career and she was the first African-American petroleum engineer from Texas A&M University, and then I was the second. So that connection from the moment I realized that she existed, because I was like, who is this unicorn? What do you mean? And so it forged this incredible relationship of very symbiotic relationship. I was insistent on being able to give as much as I could get, but that was, I credit that single-handedly with allowing me to endure so much of what I endured. And then because oftentimes I could see her and others that she introduced me to as possibilities in the future. And resilience is rooted in optimism. It's rooted in the notion that in the future things will be better than they are today. So when I'd get that 2 a.m. wake up call and I was tired and I was going to the heat and my crew wasn't going to be very nice, I knew that, you know what, if I stay the course, I will be making different leadership decisions and moving into leadership and being able to impact others in the future.
I love that. There are so many titles that are coming up for me for your episode. I like to name the episodes to inspire others. And I thought about resilience as you were just talking about that. I also like find a super mentor. I like that. If you were to title your body of career work, what would the title of the book be?
Well, it'd be What's Your Catalyst, which is the title of my book. And the reason I say that is because when I recognized my desire for career change, my desire to fully own my career, as in really getting in the driver's seat, it was identifying my catalyst, identifying what drove me. Again, that self-awareness that I spoke of, understanding my purpose, understanding my passions, and knowing very clearly my priorities. Because everyone's career, our careers look different because our goals are different, our backgrounds and experiences are different. And so it's that uniqueness that is beneficial that can sometimes be lost in organizations that want a cookie cutter development model.
And over the years, how have you dealt with risk in your career? And any tips for our listeners on how to be appreciative of risk and how to use it as a lever in your career?
I use risk as teachable moments. So the idea of risk is it's uncertainty. It's something that you don't know the outcome. And so the optimist in me looks for a positive outcome, but the project manager and engineer in me prepares for a negative outcome. And either way, I evaluate those lessons, and I'm really big on lessons learned. I evaluate those lessons as I go. I mean, not waiting until that final destination, but kind of evaluating throughout the journey. What am I learning? What do I need to do with what I'm learning? What adaptability do I need to incorporate at this moment based on the lesson I got from last week, for example. So really being resilient, being strategic. So you want to be long thinking, but also being adaptable.
Good advice. So what resources have you found over time that you can recommend to our listeners have been helpful in taking ownership of your career?
One thing that I always encourage people is to read and consume The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. It's not only a #1 bestseller because a lot of people thought, oh, it's so cool. It's because it is so life-changing and applicable. It really encourages you through the habits to know yourself, to self-reflect, to make those important decisions about who you are. The model within the book, See, Do, Get, is so important to how we even reflect on our experiences and how we apply that reflection to our next experience. So I consider that, I jokingly say to my clients that I consider that required reading for anyone with a driver's license. And thankfully, the Franklin Covey organization does as well. So they published The 7 Habits of Highly Effective Teens. So my boys, I'm the mom of 4 boys. And so they've read The 7 Habits of Highly Effective Teens when it was kind of their time. They're adults now, with the exception of my youngest. But it's the principles and the practices are just so important to incorporating into our lives.
I love that. I was devastated when Stephen Covey passed away. His book and his training, I went through some leadership training from the Covey Institute, and I was just devastated. He's one of those impactful authors. You know, I have Don Miguel Ruiz. His book is very impactful. The 4 Agreements, the 7 Habits, like you're saying, of highly effective people. I also like Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway by Dr. Susan Jeffers, the late Dr. Susan Jeffers. There are so many good books out there. As you think about virtual online, for those people who are not big readers, although they could get it on Audible, but, you know, are there sites or other resources that you can think of?
Well, I'd be remiss if I didn't encourage, readers or people to review my blog. I've got videos out there as well. I like to share that inspiration and using my journey, and also people that I've encountered. I mean, we know that there's so much learning that we get from just the people that we encounter, and when we get to share our story and their stories. There are also some great people that I follow, like Brene Brown. I love her work on empathy and how important that is. And I often look at that as, when we talk about empathy towards others, reminding ourselves of how gracious we need to be with ourselves. And it's just a really important message for us to remember, because perfectionism is the antithesis of progress, right? So we really want to continue to grow, evaluate. And so that really requires us to have, to give ourselves the appropriate amount of grace while holding ourselves accountable, but striking a great balance.
Awesome. Well, as you mentioned the blog, why don't you tell our listeners how they can stay connected with you?
Well, they can stay connected with me by going to my website, which is the missengineerway.com. That's THEMS engineerway.com. That is not just a website that's got some of my writings. Like I said, I've got some videos out there, and I'm constantly bringing to light different messages from my background. When we talk about resilience, when we talk about the fact that I started my career as in my organization, one of the only African-American women wherever I was. So I'm very intentional about pointing out those opportunities and how I leverage those to encourage other in how we can, how we can continue to overcome adversity, to be our best selves, because iron sharpens iron.
Well, that's another title in itself right there. I love that. Absolutely. So we will point listeners in the show notes to your website for more information. Any parting words as we begin to wrap up, as you think about how to soar, how to position yourself in the driver's seat for your career?
One thing that I always love to remind people is that as you continue to own your career, and as you continue to prosper, and as your position grows, I love to remind people that your purpose and your position go hand in hand. So as much as I give praise to my mentor, Paula, it's always my goal to be a Paula to someone else. So as we continue to rise, we have to be intentional about finding people whose paths we can support, whose endeavors we can cheer for, and those other people that we can continue to encourage with our encouragement, and through our own just relationships with them, and building those relationships.
Wonderful. Well, Alana, thank you so much for being a guest on the Power of Owning Your Career podcast. We appreciate all your wisdom.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Power of Owning Your Career podcast. It is my hope that you enjoyed today's episode. You can check out the show notes for this episode on the SimoneMorrisEnterprises.org website by clicking the podcast menu. Be sure to subscribe on iTunes and tell a friend or two about it.